Okay. Fuck. To fix something. Before the stream gets started, I have to fix something. Damn it. There it is. I hope this works. Alright. Since a few people are watching the stream, I'm gonna explain what I'm doing here. I'm trying to design a character for a short movie that I'm working on, and I'm not exactly sure how it's gonna end up in the end, but the goal is to portray a type of engineer and vendor, and this is an older guy, and in my mind he has some tech on him, you know, on his suit, because it plays in a dystopian cyberpunk world, but it's also supposed to be very clothy, you know, it's like heavy raincoats or wind protection or something like this. But it's highly experimental. I'm not very sure in which direction it's supposed to go. And sometimes I have to type because I'm also in a different stream and the people there can't hear me, so I have to communicate with them via chat. Another obstacle for me personally is that I try to do it with line art, which I usually don't do that often. I tend to photo bash my ideas together, but I force myself out of the comfort zone from time to time to maybe find new angles or lines or shapes. Yeah, so I might screw this up and the next one as well. But yeah, it's brutally honest. You see every mistake I'm doing. And it's very explorative, so I don't really have a plan going on. I don't know how much technology this guy is going to wear or how little. I find it with line art to be useful to have as many lines as possible at the beginning, you know, be really scribbly about your approach, and then delete the ones who prevent the image from being readable. Because when you have many lines to choose from, you might see something that you wouldn't be able to see if you just operate with super clean strokes from the beginning. I mean, some people can do it because they're very routined in their subject matter and their approach, but for super early sketches, for very rough approaches, I personally prefer, you know, as scribbly as possible. Oh, this was bad English. I prefer a very scribbly approach, let's put it like this. For some reason it also looks cool, because everyone sees slightly different things, which is one of the fun things about art and scribbles and sketches in general. Yeah, if you have questions or comments, feel free to post them. I occasionally take a look at the chat log, so I might be able to respond, or I would be very happy to respond, in fact. One other little thing that I stumble upon over and over again is having I don't want to say abundance mentality, it's not that fitting, but a throwaway mentality about your pictures. I used to cramp up while drawing when I was focusing too much on making the first image work. And usually the first image turns out to be somewhat crappy anyway, because you're not warmed up and your brain is maybe elsewhere. So when you have this feeling that it's alright to fail, it's alright to screw up, especially the first images, you get loose and it changes the result to the better, which I find very interesting to observe. And for this reason, if you're an artist, actually this principle applies to many things that are related to problem solving or creativity. You know, don't feel ashamed throwing away first results, and don't be discouraged if the first attempt doesn't work. It's totally normal. you also, if you're experienced in concept art, you see me struggling a lot, because I had a style for line art that worked pretty well and looked cool and aesthetic and pleasing. You know, line art itself can look somewhat crappy if you're not really good with shapes and line dynamics, and if you don't understand how to apply stylistic, should I say, stylistic features to your artwork. And in this case, where it's very experimental, I'm not sure which kind of style suits the design the best, and I'm doodling around. I'm not sure if it works, and sometimes line art only works at a certain quality level. Before that, everything is very abstract, or how should I say, not necessarily aesthetic. So trying to keep the balance and foreshadow a little bit how it might look in the end. I hope you understand what I mean. It's a little bit difficult to explain. Or another example, when I photo bash, the technique is cool because you start to see very early on how it might look in the end, because you have a lot of information density in the images you use, even though you destroy them in the end. But at the beginning you get a grasp how it might look. With line art you don't have this effect. It's all very, yeah, you have to stay away from this cleanness as much as possible, in my opinion at least. Of course, if you're very versed in your subject matter, you can stroke with very clean lines. This is especially interesting with car designers, I have observed, because in their field of work it's all about a very clean line, which is easier to produce with one swift stroke than with doodling around. So yeah, also the conclusion is it also depends on the subject matter. But since I have a lot of cloth here and organic stuff, I think it's preferable to scribble around. Alright. some effect that also is very interesting to observe for me is the attempt to break out of your comfort zone in terms of design as well. There is one short movie, it's called Adam, or it's an animation movie from Oat Studios, from Neil Blomkamp, and it somewhat is close-ish to the world I would like to portray. It's not exactly the same, they have totally different themes and plots, but some of the designs are really great, and they're also very fantastic. You know, they are a little bit weird, a little bit odd, a little bit even religious, I would say. And I found it really cool how the artist approached the designs, and I would like to copy that, but every time I try to get to this realm, I see that I snap back to what how should I say, to what I am comfortable with, you know, and my approach is rather realistic in terms of proportions, and I cannot break out of it, as of yet at least. Okay, this dude has a way too long torso, that I can tell. Better. Something similar happened when when I wanted to keep the designs as simple as possible and also very realistic, and I found them to be boring in the end. It's like entertainment design is very different than real world design in several aspects, and most notably, yeah, the aesthetics. I mean, real world applications have to be functional, so if you make a code, it has to be simple, it has to be manufactured relatively simply, otherwise it gets expensive, etc., etc. And when I try to approach the same mentality to entertainment design, I've found out that it lacks something. So whenever you see cyberpunk designs, they're very stuffed with details and little things that are probably completely unnecessary in a real world scenario, but they look interesting. And yeah, in the end you have to get away from being too academic about your designs if you're working for the entertainment industry or with an entertainment goal in mind. Excuse me. well, I hope you all listen to some kind of music on the side, or you know, I would love to have some background music, but YouTube is a little bit weird about, you know, their copyright infringement stuff. I can understand it, but I would love to fill the gaps when I'm not talking with interesting music, but I'm not allowed to, unfortunately. But from what I know, most people do their own thing anyway. They just let the stream run on the side. This looks fucking weird. This is such a typical shape, these 5 dots. It's so overused, and I tend to use it myself all the time as well. You know, this shape, this is so cyberpunk made in Japan. You will see it everywhere, as well as this kind of, you know, tubes protruding out of people. This is also inspired by Neon Genesis Evangelion. I think they popularized it, or Bubblegum Crisis in the late 80s. And it's funny to see how much impact these shapes had on the design world. I'm not sure if I want to keep it, because actually I want to avoid cliches. Interesting. I have like 4 people watching on YouTube and 1 person watching on Twitch, which is awesome. Hello everybody, welcome to my stream. I'm glad that you are watching it. I hope you enjoy it. Well, it starts to look somewhat okayish for my taste. It will not be the final design, it's just rather a warm-up stage, but as you can see, I try not to erase too much, and I try not to go into cleaning up mode too early on, which I tend to see people doing a lot. They try to clean up the lines very early and therefore miss the rather interesting shapes. And all this dirt is actually very welcome. It makes the image look a little bit more alive, a little bit more gritty. You have something to cling on with your eye. At a later stage, when you have to finalize the shapes and make them easier readable, then you can erase the dirt, then it makes sense. But before that, I would stay in the reiteration cycle as long as possible, or as long as necessary. And one other thing, it's not really a tip, but when I use an eraser, I try to use a small one and, you know, erase it by actually scribbling with the eraser. If I make a, you know, a huge a big stroke with a razor, it kind of loses a lot of interesting detail. And if the razor stays small, then some of the lines stay, some of the dots stay, and you get a little bit more dirt into the image, which is what I want. And even later on, when you start to clean up the shapes, I would still maintain the same technique. And later on you can also work a lot with line dynamic. There are two ways of approaching line dynamic when in an image like this. When you clean it up, you can make all the lines have a different dynamic within itself, so it looks just, you know, like a brave stroke, so to speak. You can see it, Photoshop has an interesting function. I want to demonstrate it. If I make a vector line and say that I want to stroke this path with a simulated pressure, it has very thin lines at the end and a thick line in the middle, and this looks quite cool and dynamic. This is one technique that you can use, and another one is if you want to separate certain elements from each other, you can use different thickness of lines. For instance, you can make the character pop in front of the background by drawing a fat outline at the silhouette, which I will do later on. Or if you want to separate, let's say, the scarf from his torso protection or whatever, you can make the scarf, give it a little thicker outline. This is also a very useful technique. Yeah, another thing that I really like to use is flipping the image, because whenever you do this, you get a fresh look on your design, and sometimes when you paint stuff, it gets tilted in one direction and you don't notice it until you flip it. And interestingly enough, this technique is not that new. I was assuming that it's due to the digital format, where you can flip it with one press of a button, but actually painters have used this with mirrors. They always had a huge mirror next to their painting, and when they wanted to look at it with a fresh angle, they just looked through the mirror. Man, I suck at painting boots. I want them to look fat, but not too fat. Kind of tight and cool, but they look like winter boots. Not sure if this is what I want. The thing is, this character, right now he looks like a generic, you know, mid-20 whatever, mercenary or something. But actually he's supposed to be an older guy. He's supposed to look somewhat wise and mysterious at the same time. And though he lives in a dystopian world, I still want him to have some kind of taste in clothing and wear, how should I say, elegant things here and there. And I always envisioned him with very slick and tight boots. And right now he has like very chunky winter boots or something. But you know, again, this is just a throwaway sketch. So I might also stay with the bigger boots and see how they look in reference to the next designs. This is also a good methodology for everyone who is, you know, art. I'm sorry, if I say you know too much, it's a bad habit of mine. I try to get rid of it. So what I want to say is, for everyone who wants to paint or draw and design themselves and who is a beginner, one of the best methods to get to a good design and picture is by referencing. And what I mean by that is, churn out several designs. They might be very sketchy, but make quantity also an important factor, because only if you compare your designs to each other, only then you can really tell which one is superior, or mix several together that you like. And through this comparison, this is a very strong technique. It also works with clients, because clients never know what they want. They usually only know what they don't want, and by giving them choice, you know, several sketches, several different things, only then can they choose what they really like. It's the safest way to go about, yeah, anything related to design, in my opinion. And even if you have to art direct yourself and you have an idea, but the first design didn't really work out and the second one didn't really work out, but if you compare them, you see the strengths and the weaknesses of each design way better. Looks odd. Who cares? one of the other reasons why I find line art to be rather difficult, I think it's a very abstract way of conveying visual information, because lines never exist in the real world. The lines are an abstraction of two surfaces colliding, well, not colliding, but staying next to each other. A bright surface against a brighter or a darker surface gets indicated by a line on this exact spot. So, yeah, I would say it's an abstract form, and this makes it a little bit weird to handle. And what I like to do to give the eye a little bit more information is add shadows, because shadows are like surfaces and you can indicate more geometry through them. You can separate things better from each other and give the eye a better grasp on, yeah, how the object is shaped. All right. Okay, from this point on, I am to 70% sure what's going on with the design, I think. And I know that I won't use it for sure, but this was also the point. Should just throw it away, you know. Just get the first cliché ideas out of your head so you're free to explore some really original designs. But then again, I'm not a full-time character concept artist. I wish I would be more specialized in this. No, this is the wrong sentence. If I were to be more specialized in this, I'd probably know way better how to get an original design out, you know, something really new, something really fresh. And I'm not that experienced in it, I would say. I actually don't want to sound too modest, because on the other hand I have a vision for this world which I think hasn't been done before in this combination, but then again it's more a feeling than a complete certainty, if it makes sense. But at least stylistically I'm not completely dissatisfied. I'm actually surprised that some areas work better than I expected them to. I'm sorry. I'm also extremely sick at the moment, so sometimes the things I say maybe don't make too much sense. And as you can see, when I was talking about line dynamics, I started to apply different line thicknesses. I don't know what's the plural. Different line thickness to different areas. So the absolute outline is the thickest. Things that are within the character are not as thick, because otherwise it would just look too I don't know, unaesthetic. And they are also accentuated by the shadows I drop underneath the certain elements to separate them from each other and give it a little bit more volume and readability. But still, I want to maintain this sketchy look because I love it. It might not... It's probably not the best... Though, I'm not sure if this is right. What I wanted to say is, when you give this design to a 3D artist to model it, being super sketchy might not be the best approach, but it depends on the 3D artist, because I've worked together with one who loved to go from very sketchy sketches, because everyone sees things slightly different, and it gives you room for interpretation if you have a sketch that allows you to apply your own imagination as a 3D artist. Especially if you like to be creative as a 3D artist and not just a, you know, a guy who makes 3D models out of design sketches, which can be boring, I imagine. I don't know. Depends on your personality, I would say. Yes, this starts to make sense. I can already feel it, that I get a better grasp on whatever I'm pursuing here. Oops. It might be worth mentioning that using design elements to help the eye figure out the geometry is also a very good utilization of your freedom as a designer, I would say. Because in this case I could leave, he has this code, I could leave it just blank, but it wouldn't help the eye to figure out how it's aligned. So I could say, yeah, here's some kind of, I don't know, poachers, or it's made in a specific way, it has these sections, and the way I align this section help also the eye to figure out how this cloth could feel like, how thick it is, how heavy it is. Just another hint, another small information that, yeah, helps in the whole, is helpful for the whole picture. Yeah. This brings me to another thought. Again, I've seen this with many beginning artists. They try to paint and draw things like an engineer, and sometimes this is not helpful for, or this is counterproductive for the aesthetic appeal of a picture. I've realized that art is a lot about concealment and the how should I say, concealing what's ugly and uninteresting. You know, it's art is supposed to be entertaining or aesthetic, and or not always, but in my case, the art I want to do, it's all about how beautiful something can look like, how aesthetic it can be. And sometimes things are not aesthetic, so how to cover them up, how to leave stuff out that is boring and dull. And many people who begin don't necessarily understand this, and they try to display everything as honest as possible, which makes their images a little bit boring here and there. So yeah, my point is, if you want to be a good artist, learn how to cover up the uninteresting parts of your image. Oh, this might be a little bit too thick. One other thing that I might be also worth mentioning is the rhythm in your design. This is a concept that I think of a lot when I design architecture, because in architecture it's way more evident. When you look at buildings, you have rows of windows, for example, that are repetitive and they give your design a certain rhythm. If you have basically identical elements that repeat each other in a certain frequency, it gives a specific feel. And when I approach rather organic design, like a human or character design, you have I sometimes run into the problem that I'm too much miss and match in my image. I throw all kinds of things on the character and I don't have one element that repeats itself, and that looks very post-apocalyptic. Of course it depends on the genre and the subject matter in the end, but I really like to have elements that reference each other. And as you can see, there are always these rows of certain things that give the character little fragments of rhythm here and there. And if you think about it, it's a very interesting statement about the time era you are finding yourself in. If you're doing something medieval or Renaissance style, or let's say if you're in the Renaissance era, you probably have a lot of elaborate floresque forms. If you are in the information age, it's rather, high-tech, you have straight lines. If you are post-apocalyptic, it's all miss and match. So the design language communicates a lot of information about the resources and the design trends of the genre and era you are working in. I'm not sure what to do about his right shoulder. It seems a little bit unclear what's going on there. But I like his upper torso from the style and the density. It's actually when I think about it, it's rather funny, because it doesn't matter if I make music or if I paint, the quality or the style of the product is really important for me. It's as important as the quality of the subject matter itself. I could have a good design, but if the style of the drawing is not fitting, it kind of lacks something. I don't want to say style over substance, but in some cases, well, in most cases, while working, style is as important as the substance, because it carries a certain flair, and actually is way more fun when the style is cool as well, if it's pretty to look at. I mean, in other words, I could do a schematic drawing of a character design, but it doesn't look interesting. It might be a good design still, but in this case it doesn't look as interesting as it would be if I stylize it, if I sketch it out, if I make it in a certain pose. And you know, I hope it makes sense, but I discovered this over and over again. Sometimes you have images where you can see, okay, the strokes are really interesting, the style is really great, but the design is sloppy, or the motif sucks, or whatever. Then I would say, okay, one of the parameters is obviously off, but ideally you want to keep both in balance. When I was playing in bands, our goal was to be the best, how should I say, to perform the music as best as possible. To be so good that you couldn't distinguish if it's played from a CD or if it's played live. And we were pretty close to that goal, but our live show sucked because barely anyone was moving, and we had to get this parameter also a little bit polished up. But ultimately, if you feel the music and if you move to it and if you perform not only musically on a high level but also energetically, then you have the best full package, in my opinion. And it's fun, which is the most important thing. Yeah, and then you have tons of bands who jump around on stage but play crap, which would be the opposite side of the problem, of the coin. Alright, I'm gonna stream a couple of more minutes and then I'm gonna quit because I'm super sick and I don't have a lot of focus left. Unfortunately. I was eager to stream a lot during the last week, but I was so freaking fragging sick. I don't even know what exactly hit me. It was a little bit like food poisoning, but without any food poisoning. Weird thing. But my personal theory was that it's psychosomatically induced. Maybe some kind of stress or something. Who knows? No. I don't know what to do here? Gotta do something about the arm. Scheiße. It's actually supposed to be spring outside, but to be honest, it feels like fall. It feels like winter is coming. The weather here in Berlin is a little bit moody at the moment. Doesn't make sense. Well, alright. I'm actually way more satisfied than I expected to be. Thank you everyone for watching. This was my highest number of people watching for the last month, surprisingly. Once again, thank you very much. Enjoy your Saturday evening and hope to see you next time.